There's a very specific feeling you get the moment a Daredevil Born Again trailer starts rolling, and it's not the usual glossy Marvel adrenaline rush. It's quieter than that, heavier. It feels like you've walked into a room where something already happened, something bad, and nobody's explaining it to you yet. And Season 2's first official look leans hard into that exact mood. Like it knows the audience remembers the bruises, the broken bones, and the moral compromises from before. And it's not interested in softening any of it. The first few seconds don't even give you Daredevil. Instead, you hear the city. Not the postcard version of New York, but that layered, restless hum. Distant sirens, a subway rattling underneath, a conversation you can't quite make out. It's the kind of sound design that tells you this isn't about spectacle first. It's about environment, about pressure. And then, almost casually, you get Matt Murdock sitting in what looks like a dimly lit office, hands folded, face tighter than we've seen in a while. Charlie Cox plays him with this controlled stillness that honestly feels more dangerous than when he's in the suit. There's a line, barely above a whisper, something about lines that don't move anymore. And you realize pretty quickly, this season isn't going to be about whether Matt crosses the line. It's about what happens when he already has, and now has to live in that space. And that's where the trailer starts layering its intent. It cuts to Wilson Fisk, not loudly, not with some big reveal shot, but just sitting there, almost relaxed, which is somehow worse. Vincent D'Onofrio has always played Fisk like a man who believes he's the calmest person in the room, even when he's seconds away from breaking someone's skull. And here he feels established, not rising to power, not clawing for control, already there. That's the shift. Season 1 of Born Again felt like a reintroduction, a recalibration. This footage suggests Season 2 is where the consequences settle in. You start noticing how the trailer avoids the typical rhythm. There's no rapid-fire montage of action beats every 2 seconds. Instead, it lingers. A hallway, a courtroom, a rooftop with wind cutting through the silence. When Daredevil finally appears in full, it's not framed like a superhero entrance. It's almost observational. He's already mid-motion, already engaged, like the camera just caught up to him. And the suit, subtly different, a little more worn in, less pristine, feels like a visual metaphor for where Matt is psychologically. This isn't someone stepping into heroism. This is someone carrying it like a weight he's not sure he wants anymore. There's a sequence in the trailer that really sticks, where the editing starts to blur the lines between Matt's two worlds. You see him in court, arguing a case, and the audio overlaps with him in the suit, breathing hard after a fight. It's not flashy, but it's incredibly deliberate. The show is telling you that the separation between Matt Murdock and Daredevil isn't holding the way it used to. And honestly, that's always been the most compelling thing about this character, going all the way back to the Daredevil days. Not the action, though when it lands, it really lands, but the tension between identity and purpose. The idea that doing the right thing can still break you if you do it long enough. What surprised me most watching this trailer, though, is how little it tries to sell you on scale. There are glimpses of bigger things, crowds, unrest, hints that Fisk's influence is spreading into places it shouldn't, but the focus stays intimate, personal. You're not being promised a city-saving epic. You're being warned about a character study that just happens to involve violence. There's even a moment, blink and you miss it, where Matt looks genuinely unsure. Not conflicted in that heroic cinematic way, just uncertain. And that's rare in this genre right now. Most shows want their leads to project confidence even when they're struggling. Here, the uncertainty feels like the point. The trailer also teases returning faces without leaning too heavily into nostalgia. You catch glimpses, familiar silhouettes, voices that longtime fans will recognize instantly, but it never stops the momentum to say, "Hey, remember this?" It trusts that you do, and if you don't, it doesn't care. That confidence is refreshing. There's a particular exchange, no context, just 2 lines back to back, where Fisk says something about order, and Matt responds with something that sounds less like a rebuttal and more like a confession. And suddenly the dynamic between them feels less like hero versus villain, and more like two men who believe they're solving the same problem in completely incompatible ways. And that's where the trailer quietly reframes everything. This isn't about stopping Fisk anymore. It's about whether Matt can even define what stopping means when the system itself is bending. Visually, there's a noticeable shift too. The lighting is harsher in some scenes, softer in others, almost like the show is experimenting with perspective. Street-level fights feel cramped, chaotic, almost suffocating, while the political or legal spaces feel wide but empty, like power isolates rather than expands. You also get a sense that the action, when it happens, is going to be more brutal than flashy. There's a quick shot of a fight in what looks like a stairwell, tight space, no room to move, and it immediately calls back to what made the original series stand out. Not because it was violent, but because it felt exhausting, like every punch cost something. And maybe that's the thread running through all of this: cost. Every frame of this trailer feels like it's asking the same question in different ways. How much does it take before a person stops believing in the thing they've dedicated their life to? There's no big musical swell at the end, no triumphant hero pose, just a quiet moment. Matt standing still, head slightly tilted, listening to something we can't hear. And then it cuts to black. And you sit there for a second longer than usual because it doesn't feel like it's trying to excite you. It feels like it's trying to unsettle you. And that lingering unease from the trailer, it doesn't really go away once you start piecing together what Season 2 is actually doing beneath the surface. Because the story doesn't open with a bang. It opens like something already in motion. Like the machinery of the city has been grinding for months and we're just now catching up to it mid-turn. Matt isn't in a good place when we find him again. Not broken in the obvious sense, not limping around or hiding out somewhere dramatic, but there's a kind of emotional fatigue in him that you can feel even before he says a word. He's still practicing law, still showing up to court, still doing all the things that define Matt Murdock on paper, but the intention behind it feels thinner. Like routine has replaced conviction. There's this early case he takes. Nothing flashy, just a low-level situation involving a man caught in the crossfire of something bigger. And it should feel like the kind of case Matt used to thrive on. The underdog, the overlooked, the person the system doesn't really care about. But something's off. He argues it well, of course, because that's who he is. But you can tell he's not fully there. His mind keeps drifting somewhere else. Or maybe it's not drifting. Maybe it's stuck. And then you start to understand why. Because the city itself has changed in a way that's subtle, but undeniable. Crime hasn't disappeared, not even close, but it's more organized now, more structured. There's a rhythm to it that wasn't there before. Things happen, but they happen with purpose, with coordination. It doesn't feel chaotic anymore, it feels managed. Which brings you inevitably back to Wilson Fisk. He's not operating from the shadows the way he used to. That's the first major shift. There's a public-facing version of Fisk now that's almost disarming in how composed it is. Press appearances, community initiatives, speeches about rebuilding and unity. It's all there, and it's all convincing enough that people want to believe it. And that's the dangerous part. He's not forcing control this time. He's being handed pieces of it. Vincent D'Onofrio plays this evolution with this eerie restraint. The volatility is still there. You can feel it under the surface, but it's buried beneath layers of discipline. Fisk has learned. He's adapted. He's not just reacting anymore, he's anticipating. Meanwhile, Matt is stuck reacting, and that imbalance starts to define the entire narrative. There's a moment, not a big set piece, just a quiet scene, where Matt walks through Hell's Kitchen at night without the suit. No mask, no armor, just him. And the way it's shot, the way the camera lingers on his face as he listens, you realize something unsettling. He doesn't recognize the city the same way anymore. The sounds are different. The patterns don't line up with what he expects. It's like his internal map is outdated. And that disconnect starts bleeding into everything. When he finally puts the suit back on, it doesn't feel like a return. It feels like a question. Is this still the right way to do this? Does it even matter anymore? The fights, when they come, are less about victory and more about interruption. He's not dismantling operations, he's disrupting moments. And the people he's going up against, they're not just random criminals. They're parts of something larger, something that keeps functioning even when you take out a piece. There's a particularly tense sequence involving a warehouse on the edge of the city. On the surface, it looks like a standard bust. Illegal shipments, armed guards, the usual setup. But the way it unfolds tells you everything you need to know about how things have changed. Matt gets in, takes down a few guys, starts to think he's making progress, and then he realizes the operation isn't even reacting to him. It's continuing, like he's not a threat, just a disturbance. That realization hits harder than any physical blow. At the same time, his legal work starts intersecting with something much bigger than he initially understands. That early case, the one that felt small, turns out to be connected to a network of decisions and policies that trace back to Fisk's public initiatives. Not directly, not in a way you can prove easily, but enough to suggest that the system itself is being reshaped. And this is where the show leans into something really interesting. It stops framing the conflict as good versus evil, and starts framing it as control versus resistance. Fisk isn't trying to destroy the city. He's trying to perfect it, at least from his perspective. And that makes him harder to fight, because he's not operating outside the system anymore. He's inside it. Matt, on the other hand, is caught between two approaches that both feel insufficient. The law isn't enough because it's being influenced from within, and vigilantism isn't enough because it can't address something this widespread. There's a stretch of episodes where you can feel him searching for a third option, something that doesn't exist yet. And that search is messy. He makes mistakes, he pushes people away. He starts making decisions that don't sit right, even with him. You see it in the way he talks, or doesn't talk, to the people around him. Conversations get shorter, more guarded. There's a hesitation where there used to be clarity. And when he does open up, it feels almost accidental, like something slipping through rather than something he chose to share. Fisk, in contrast, becomes more open, more visible, more approachable. It's almost ironic. The villain is the one building connections, while the hero is the one isolating himself. And that contrast builds slowly, until it starts to feel like the entire season is tilting in Fisk's favor. Not because he's stronger, but because he understands the game better now. There's a key turning point, again, not played as a huge explosive moment, but something quieter, more internal, where Matt realizes that everything he's been doing is operating on outdated assumptions. He's been fighting the version of Fisk that used to exist, not the one that's in front of him now. And that realization forces a shift. Not immediate, not clean, but undeniable. You start to see him change the way he approaches situations. Less direct confrontation, more observation. Less certainty, more calculation. It's like he's relearning how to be Daredevil in a world that doesn't respond the way it used to. But even that comes with a cost. Because the more he adapts, the more he starts to resemble the kind of strategist Fisk is. And there's this underlying tension in every decision he makes. How far can he go before he becomes something he doesn't recognize? By the time the first major arc of the season settles, you're left with this uneasy balance. Fisk isn't defeated, not even close. If anything, he's more secure than ever. And Matt isn't victorious. He's aware. More aware than he was before, but also more burdened by that awareness. And that's the thing the show keeps circling back to. Knowledge doesn't always empower you. Sometimes, it just makes the weight heavier. And you can feel that weight in the way Matt carries himself by the end of this stretch. Like every step forward is also pulling him somewhere he's not entirely sure he wants to go. And that sense of being pulled somewhere unfamiliar, it doesn't ease up, it actually tightens as the story keeps unfolding. Because the more Matt starts adjusting his approach, the more the world around him seems to anticipate those adjustments before he even fully commits to them. Which is a terrifying place for someone like him to be. Someone who's always relied on instinct and pattern recognition as a kind of second sight. There's a stretch where he begins working cases that, on the surface, don't seem connected at all. Different clients, different neighborhoods, different kinds of crimes. But there's a thread running underneath, and you can see him starting to trace it. Not in a dramatic aha moment, but in these small behavioral shifts. He listens longer before speaking. He asks questions that feel slightly off topic until you realize he's mapping something bigger. And what he's mapping isn't a crime ring in the traditional sense. It's influence. That's the word that starts to define everything. Influence in zoning decisions, influence in policing priorities, influence in which cases get attention and which ones quietly disappear. And the unsettling part is that none of it is illegal in a clean, prosecutable way. It's all gray, technically permissible, structurally sound, which is exactly why Wilson Fisk is winning. You see more of his public persona during this stretch, and it's honestly disarming in a way that makes you question your own instincts as a viewer. He's calm, measured, even compassionate in certain moments. There's a scene where he visits a community center. No grand speech, no cameras shoved in his face, just a conversation with people who genuinely seem to trust him. And for a second, you understand why. Vincent D'Onofrio plays those moments without a hint of irony. There's no wink to the audience, no reminder that this is the villain. He lets you sit in the discomfort of recognizing that Fisk's version of order actually works, at least on the surface. And that complicates everything for Matt. Because how do you fight someone who isn't breaking the rules anymore, someone who's rewriting them in ways that feel beneficial to the people they affect? There's a sequence that really crystallizes this tension. Matt is in court again, arguing a case that should be straightforward, but halfway through, it starts unraveling. Evidence that should be admissible gets challenged, testimonies shift, technicalities pile up, and you can see it happening in real time, the system bending, not dramatically, not illegally, just enough to change the outcome. He loses the case, and it doesn't feel like a failure of skill. It feels like the ground moved beneath him. That loss hits differently than the physical setbacks we've seen before. There's no bruising, no visible damage, but you can tell it cuts deeper. Because this is the arena where Matt Murdock is supposed to have control. This is where he's supposed to make a difference without becoming something else. And for the first time, that certainty is gone. So when he puts the suit back on after that, it's not out of anger. It's out of something closer to desperation. Not reckless desperation, but a quiet, contained urgency. Like he's trying to prove to himself that there's still a version of this fight he understands. The action sequences during this phase reflect that shift. They're sharper, more deliberate, but also more restrained. He's not lashing out, he's testing. Pushing boundaries, seeing how far he can go, what works and what doesn't. There's a particularly intense encounter in what looks like an abandoned subway platform. The lighting is harsh, flickering, the space echoing with every movement. He's up against a group that's clearly trained, not just muscle, but coordinated, disciplined. And the fight isn't about overpowering them. It's about outthinking them. But even when he wins, and he does, eventually, it doesn't feel like a victory, because the information he gets out of it only confirms what he's starting to fear. This network he's uncovering isn't centralized. It doesn't fall apart if you remove one piece. It adapts. That adaptability mirrors Fisk in a way that feels intentional. It's like the system itself has taken on his philosophy. Meanwhile, Matt's personal world continues to shrink in subtle ways. Relationships that once grounded him start to feel strained, not because of any single argument or betrayal, but because he's changing in ways that are hard to articulate. He's more guarded, more analytical, less willing to lean on people the way he used to. There's a conversation, quiet, almost hesitant, where someone close to him asks if he's okay. And there's a pause that stretches just a little too long before he answers. He says yes, but it doesn't land. Not because it's a lie exactly, but because it's incomplete. And that incompleteness starts defining him. At the same time, Fisk's world expands. His influence reaches into places that feel almost untouchable. You start hearing his name in contexts that have nothing to do with crime. Policy discussions, development projects, even cultural spaces. It's like he's embedding himself into the identity of the city, And that's when the story takes a turn that feels both inevitable and surprising. Matt realizes that fighting Fisk directly, whether in court or in the streets, isn't going to be enough. Not anymore. The problem isn't Fisk as an individual. It's the structure he's built, the systems he's influenced, the narratives he's shaped. So the question becomes, how do you dismantle something that people believe in? That question doesn't get answered immediately. Instead, it lingers, influencing every decision Matt makes moving forward. You see him start to gather information differently, to look at the city not just as a series of locations, but as a network of relationships. And that shift in perspective leads him to places and people he might have overlooked before. There's a moment where he's standing on a rooftop again, listening, but this time it's different. He's not just hearing crime, not just tracking movement. He's listening for patterns, for connections, for the subtle ways things align. And when something clicks, when he starts to see a path forward, it's not a clean, heroic realization. It's complicated, risky. It requires him to step into areas that blur the line even further between who he is as a lawyer and who he is as Daredevil. Because the strategy he begins to form, it's not about stopping Fisk in a single decisive move. It's about undermining the foundation he's built, slowly, carefully, in ways that might not even be visible at first. But that kind of approach demands patience. And patience, in a world that's constantly shifting, comes with its own dangers, especially when the person you're up against is already several steps ahead and knows exactly how long you're willing to wait. And that idea of patience, it starts to feel less like a strategy and more like a risk the longer it stretches out. Because the deeper Matt Murdock gets into this quieter, more calculated way of fighting back, the more it forces him to sit still in moments where every instinct is telling him to act. And that tension between restraint and urgency becomes almost unbearable to watch at times. You can see it in the way he moves through the city now. There's less of that immediate, reactive energy he used to carry. Instead, there's this constant scanning, this sense that he's always holding something back, not out of fear, but out of necessity. He's choosing not to intervene in situations he would have jumped into before. And each one of those choices feels like a small fracture forming under the surface. Because the truth is, he's not entirely sure this new approach is going to work. What makes it even more complicated is that the people around him start noticing that hesitation. Not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but in subtle observations. Conversations that trail off. Questions that don't quite get answered. There's a growing awareness that Matt isn't operating the way he used to, and while nobody can fully articulate why, they can feel the shift. At the same time, Wilson Fisk continues to expand his reach in ways that are almost elegant in their precision. There's no sense of overreach, no visible cracks in his public image. If anything, he becomes more measured, more selective about where and how he exerts influence. There's a sequence involving a city council meeting that, on paper, sounds like it should be one of the least interesting parts of the story. And somehow, it becomes one of the most tense. Not because of anything overtly dramatic, but because of what it represents. Decisions being made quietly, policies shifting in ways that seem minor until you realize how they connect. And Fisk doesn't dominate that space with force. He barely speaks, but when he does, the room listens. Vincent D'Onofrio plays it with this almost unsettling calm, like someone who knows he doesn't need to raise his voice to control the outcome. And that's the version of Fisk that's hardest to confront. Not the one who lashes out, but the one who doesn't have to. Meanwhile, Matt's investigation starts leading him towards something that feels less like a single target and more like a pattern embedded across multiple layers of the city. It's not just about crime or politics or business. It's about how all of those things intersect. There's a moment where he lays it out, not in a speech, not in some grand declaration, but in a quiet realization that unfolds piece by piece. He starts connecting dots that, individually, don't seem significant. A zoning change here, a dismissed case there, a funding decision that shifts resources in a way that feels almost invisible. And when you step back and look at it the way he does, it forms something cohesive, something intentional. That's when it really clicks for him. Fisk isn't just building power. He's redesigning the ecosystem that defines how power operates. And suddenly, everything Matt has been doing starts to feel like it's happening on the surface of something much deeper. That realization doesn't empower him right away. If anything, it weighs him down even more. Because now the scale of what he's up against is clearer, and it's bigger than anything he's faced before. Not in terms of physical danger, but in terms of structural complexity. So when he finally makes a move, an actual deliberate step forward, it carries a different kind of weight. It's not a direct attack on Fisk. It's not even aimed at him. Not exactly. Instead, Matt targets one of the smaller, less visible components of this larger system. Something that doesn't seem critical at first glance, but is essential in how it connects other pieces together. And the way he goes about it, it's careful. Almost surgical. There's a sequence where he operates both as a lawyer and as Daredevil within the same stretch of time, and the editing intercuts those identities in a way that makes them feel inseparable. He's gathering information legally while simultaneously applying pressure in places the law can't reach. It's effective. For the first time in a while, you feel like he's actually gaining ground. But that success comes with an immediate consequence, because the moment he disrupts that piece of the system, there's a response. Not loud, not explosive, but precise, targeted, like something correcting itself. And that's when you realize Fisk was expecting this. Not the exact move, not the specific detail, but the idea that Matt would eventually adapt, that he would shift strategies, start thinking differently. And he's already accounted for that possibility. The response isn't aimed directly at Matt. It doesn't need to be. Instead, it affects the people and spaces around him. Subtle pressures that ripple outward, creating complications that force him to reconsider his next step. It's a reminder that this isn't a game where you can make a move without consequences. And for Matt, those consequences start to feel personal in a way they haven't for a while. There's a moment, quiet, almost understated, where he realizes that the line he's been trying so hard not to cross, he might already be standing on it. Not because he's done something overtly wrong, but because the choices he's making are starting to mirror the kind of calculated thinking he's been fighting against. And that realization lingers. It doesn't stop him. It doesn't send him spiraling, but it changes the way he carries himself. There's a new layer of self-awareness there, one that makes every decision feel heavier, more deliberate. By the time this phase of the story settles, the balance between him and Fisk feels more fragile than ever. Not because Matt is losing, he's not entirely, but because the margin for error has become so thin that even a small misstep could tip everything. And the unsettling part is, Fisk seems completely comfortable operating within that margin. While Matt is still adjusting to it, still feeling the weight of every choice, Fisk moves through it like it's exactly where he wants to be. And that difference, between someone adapting to the game and someone who designed it, creates a tension that doesn't explode. It just tightens, slowly, steadily, until you can't ignore it anymore. And the tension doesn't snap the way you expect it to. It compresses, almost silently, until it starts affecting the smallest choices Matt makes, the kind that used to come naturally, the kind he never had to second guess before, and now every one of them feels like it carries consequences he can't fully predict, which is a dangerous place for someone like him to operate, because hesitation, even for a second, can cost you everything in both of his worlds. There's a stretch where he begins to operate almost like two separate people who haven't quite figured out how to talk to each other anymore. As Matt Murdock, he's cautious, precise, trying to build something that holds up under scrutiny, something that can survive in a courtroom, in public, in the daylight where everything has to make sense. But as Daredevil, he's starting to push further into gray territory, taking risks that don't align cleanly with that version of himself. And the gap between those two identities, it's widening. You can feel it most in the way the show handles time during this part of the story. Days blur into nights, conversations bleed into confrontations, and there's this constant sense that Matt isn't fully present in either space. He's always thinking about the other side of himself, always calculating how one decision is going to echo into the next. Meanwhile, Wilson Fisk seems more unified than ever. There's no separation in him anymore between public figure and private operator. It's all one continuous identity now, seamlessly shifting depending on what the moment requires. And that cohesion gives him an advantage that's hard to quantify, but impossible to ignore. You see it in a sequence where he's navigating multiple conversations at once: political allies, business partners, community leaders, and there's no strain, no visible effort. Each interaction feels tailored, intentional, like he understands exactly what each person needs to hear. Vincent D'Onofrio plays it with this almost unnerving confidence, like someone who has finally aligned every part of himself toward a single goal. And that contrast, Matt fracturing while Fisk consolidates, becomes the emotional core of this stretch. There's a moment that doesn't involve action at all, but it hits harder than most of the fights. Matt is alone, sitting in his apartment, the city noise filtering in through the windows, and he's just still. Not meditating, not strategizing, just existing in that space. And for a second, you get the sense that he's trying to remember what it felt like to be certain about anything. Because certainty is gone now. Every lead he follows opens up more questions. Every move he makes reveals another layer he hadn't accounted for. It's not that he's losing ground. It's that the ground keeps shifting in ways that make progress feel temporary. And yet, he keeps going. There's a turning point where he decides to take a bigger risk, something that goes beyond the careful, incremental approach he's been trying to maintain. Not a reckless leap, but a calculated escalation. He targets a more visible part of Fisk's network, something that, if disrupted, would create a noticeable impact. The kind of move that forces a response. And the way it plays out, it's tense, methodical, almost quiet in its execution. He gathers information, sets things in motion, positions himself in a way that gives him the best possible chance of success without exposing too much. For a moment, it works. You can feel the shift ripple outward. Systems that were running smoothly start to stutter. People who were operating with confidence suddenly seem uncertain. There's a disruption in the pattern, and for the first time, it feels like Matt has actually created an opening. But openings don't stay open for long in this world. The response comes faster this time, sharper, more direct. And it doesn't just counter what Matt has done, it reframes it. Suddenly, his actions are being interpreted in a way that changes how others see him. Not as a protector, not as someone trying to correct a broken system, but as a destabilizing force. Someone interfering with progress, with order, with something that, from the outside, looks like improvement. That shift in perception is subtle, but it's powerful. Because once people start seeing you that way, it changes the environment you're operating in. It limits your options. It makes every move riskier, every decision more complicated. And Matt feels that shift immediately. There's a sequence where he's moving through the city again, listening the way he always does. But the sounds are different now. Not in a literal sense, but in how they're directed. Conversations that used to carry a certain tone now feel altered. There's hesitation where there used to be trust, suspicion where there used to be relief. It's like the city itself is starting to question him. At the same time, Fisk's presence becomes even more entrenched. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more accepted, more normalized. And that normalization is what makes him so difficult to challenge at this point. Because he's no longer an anomaly, he's part of the structure. So when Matt looks at the path ahead, it's not about finding a way to defeat Fisk in a traditional sense. It's about figuring out how to disrupt something that people have started to depend on. And that's a much harder problem to solve. There's a quiet realization that settles in during this part of the story. One that doesn't get spoken out loud, but is clearly there in the way Matt carries himself. This isn't going to end cleanly. There's no scenario where everything resets, where the city goes back to what it was, where the lines between right and wrong become clear again. Whatever happens next is going to leave marks. On the city, on the people in it, on him. And once that realization takes hold, the way he approaches everything changes again. He stops looking for perfect solutions. Instead, he starts looking for necessary ones. And that shift, away from idealism, towards something more pragmatic, feels like the final step in his evolution over the course of this story arc. Not a fall, not a corruption, but a transformation that comes from understanding the limits of the world he's trying to protect. By the time this part of the story closes out, the balance between him and Fisk isn't just fragile, it's volatile. Not because one of them is about to win, but because they've both reached a point where the next move, whatever it is going to change the shape of the entire board. And neither of them is stepping back anymore. And once both of them reach that point, where stepping back isn't even part of the equation anymore, you can feel the entire story tightening around that inevitability. Like everything that's been building quietly in the background is now starting to lean forward at the same time. Not exploding yet, but preparing to. Because the thing about escalation in a story like this, it doesn't announce itself with noise. It shows up in the absence of hesitation. And that's exactly what happens next. Matt stops questioning whether he should act and starts focusing entirely on how. That internal debate that's been slowing him down, that constant second guessing, it doesn't disappear, but it gets pushed aside. Not resolved, just deprioritized. And that's a subtle but significant shift, because it means he's willing to move forward even without full clarity. There's a different energy to him now, still controlled, still deliberate, but with a sharper edge. Like he's accepted that whatever comes next is going to cost something, and he's already bracing for it. At the same time, Wilson Fisk doesn't escalate in the way you might expect either. There's no sudden show of force, no dramatic tightening of control. If anything, he becomes even more composed, more measured. It's almost as if he's reached a point where he doesn't need to react immediately anymore. And that's what makes him dangerous here. Because while Matt is preparing for a confrontation, whatever form it takes, Fisk is operating on a longer timeline. He's not thinking about the next move, he's thinking about the outcome. There's a sequence that captures this contrast perfectly. Matt is moving through a series of locations over the course of a single night, gathering pieces, connecting information, setting something up. It's urgent, but not frantic, focused. Intercut with that, you see Fisk in a completely different rhythm. Daytime meetings, controlled environments, conversations that unfold at a slower pace. And yet, by the end of that sequence, it's clear that both of them have made progress toward the same inevitable collision, just in very different ways. What's fascinating is how the story starts to blur the lines between those approaches. Matt begins using tactics that feel strategic in a way that mirrors Fisk. Not in intention, but in execution. He's thinking several steps ahead now, anticipating reactions, setting up outcomes rather than just responding to them. And there's a moment where that realization hits him, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet discomfort. Because the more effective he becomes in this new way of operating, the harder it is to ignore how similar it feels to the methods he's been fighting against. But he doesn't stop. Because at this point, stopping would mean conceding ground he can't afford to lose. There's a key operation he sets in motion during this stretch, something that's been building in the background for a while. It's not a direct strike at Fisk, but it's close enough that the ripple effect is unavoidable. It targets a critical connection point in the system, something that holds multiple pieces together. The execution is precise, coordinated across both sides of his identity. As Matt Murdock, he's laying the legal groundwork, positioning things in a way that can withstand scrutiny. As Daredevil, he's applying pressure in places that can't be addressed through official channels. For a moment, it feels like everything is aligning. You can sense the system shifting again, but this time in a way that suggests something might actually break. And then, it doesn't. It bends. That's the moment where everything changes, because instead of collapsing, the structure absorbs the disruption, adjusts, redirects. And in doing so, it reveals just how resilient it's become under Fisk's influence. The consequences of that failed breakthrough aren't immediate or explosive. They're quieter, more insidious. Opportunities that were within reach suddenly close off. People who were potential allies become harder to access. Paths that seemed viable just hours before are no longer there. And Matt realizes something that's been building beneath the surface this entire time. He's not just up against a system that's controlled, he's up against one that's designed to survive being challenged. That realization doesn't break him, but it changes the stakes in a way that can't be undone. Because now the question isn't how to win, it's what winning even looks like in a situation like this. There's a moment, again, quiet, almost understated, where Matt stands in the middle of the city, surrounded by everything he's been trying to protect, and you can feel the weight of that question settling in. Not overwhelming him, not paralyzing him, but grounding him in a way that's almost heavier than doubt. At the same time, Fisk reaches a point where his position feels almost untouchable. Not because he's invincible, but because he's embedded himself so deeply into the fabric of the city that removing him would require unraveling things people have come to rely on. And that's the paradox at the heart of this entire story. The better Fisk becomes at creating order, the harder it becomes to justify dismantling it, which leaves Matt in an impossible position. Because the version of justice he believes in, it doesn't align neatly with the reality he's facing anymore. So when the story reaches this phase, where both sides have evolved, adapted, and entrenched themselves, it stops feeling like a traditional conflict altogether. It feels like a standoff between two philosophies that can't coexist, but also can't easily eliminate each other. And the next step, whatever it is, isn't going to resolve that tension. It's going to redefine it. And that redefinition, it doesn't arrive as some clean, decisive shift you can point to and say, that's where everything changed. It creeps in through smaller moments, almost unnoticed at first, until suddenly, the entire framework of what you thought this story was building toward starts to feel different. Because Matt stops chasing the idea of ending this, not out of defeat, not because he's given up, but because he finally understands that ending it might not even be a real option anymore. And once that realization settles in, the way he moves through the world becomes something else entirely. He's not trying to win, he's trying to contain. That shift sounds subtle, but it changes everything. There's a sequence where he deliberately chooses not to act on something he absolutely could intervene in. It's the kind of situation that, earlier in the season, would have pulled him in instantly. No hesitation, no calculation. But now he watches it unfold, listens, processes, and steps back. And it's uncomfortable to sit with as a viewer, because you know he could do something. You expect him to. And when he doesn't, it forces you to question whether restraint is wisdom or compromise. That's the space Matt Murdock is living in now. Meanwhile, Wilson Fisk continues to refine his version of control to the point where it almost feels invisible. There's less emphasis on expansion now, more on stabilization. He's not reaching for more power, he's reinforcing what he already has. And that's where Vincent D'Onofrio brings something really fascinating into the performance. There's a calm satisfaction in Fisk now. Not arrogance, not even pride, just a quiet confidence that what he's built is sustainable, which makes him harder to disrupt than ever. There's a scene that plays out in a completely unexpected way. No confrontation, no physical conflict, just a conversation. Matt and Fisk in the same space, speaking to each other without masks, without the usual layers of identity separating them. And it's not explosive, it's controlled, careful, almost respectful. That's what makes it unsettling. Because beneath every word, there's an understanding. They both know exactly what the other is capable of. They both recognize the path the other has taken to get here. And there's this unspoken acknowledgement that neither of them is the same person they were when this started. The conversation doesn't resolve anything, it reframes everything. Fisk talks about stability, about the idea that a city like this needs structure, needs someone willing to make decisions others won't. And Matt pushes back, not with anger, not with moral superiority, but with something more measured. He questions the cost of that stability, the things that get sacrificed to maintain it. And for a moment, neither of them sounds entirely wrong. That's the uncomfortable truth the story leans into here. This isn't a battle between right and wrong anymore. It's a conflict between two visions of what the city should be, both of which come with consequences. After that encounter, Matt doesn't walk away with clarity. He walks away with more weight. Because now it's not just about stopping Fisk. It's about deciding whether stopping him would actually make things better, or just different. And that question doesn't have an easy answer. So the final stretch of this story doesn't build toward a traditional climax. It builds toward a choice. Not a single dramatic decision, but a series of them. Smaller moments where Matt has to decide how far he's willing to go, what lines he's willing to blur, what compromises he can live with. There's a sense that every move now is less about immediate impact and more about long-term consequence. He's thinking beyond the next fight, beyond the next case. He's thinking about what kind of world he's helping shape, even in the smallest ways. And that perspective changes the tone of everything. The action, when it happens, feels more purposeful, less about spectacle, more about intent. Every movement, every choice carries meaning beyond the moment itself. There's a final sequence in this part of the story that brings all of these threads together, not in a loud, explosive way, but in something quieter, more controlled. Matt executes a plan that doesn't dismantle Fisk's system, doesn't bring everything crashing down, but it creates a shift. A subtle one. The kind you might not notice immediately unless you're paying attention. It opens a space. Not a victory, not a resolution, just an opening. And that's where it leaves you. Fisk still standing, still in control, at least on the surface. The system's still intact, still functioning. But now there's a crack. Small, precise, intentional. And Matt, he's changed. Not in a way that feels like a loss of who he is, but in a way that reflects everything he's been through. He's more measured, more aware, more willing to operate in that gray space he used to resist, which is both a strength and a risk. Because once you start living in that space, it becomes harder to define where you stand. And that's the feeling that lingers as this part of the story comes to a close. Not triumph, not defeat, but something more complicated. The sense that the fight isn't over, it's just evolved. There's something really interesting about where all of that leaves the story as a whole. Because instead of wrapping things up with a sense of closure, it settles into this uneasy, almost philosophical space, where the real conflict isn't just between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk anymore. It's between ideas that don't have clean endpoints. And that makes the timing of this season and the way it's positioned within the larger industry feel very deliberate. Because when you look at where superhero storytelling has been over the last decade, especially within the framework built by Marvel Studios, there's been this gradual shift away from straightforward hero versus villain narratives towards something more introspective, more character-driven. But not every project fully commits to that shift. A lot of them still rely on spectacle as the primary hook. What Born Again Season 2 seems to be doing is leaning in the opposite direction. It's not abandoning scale entirely, but it's reframing what scale means. Instead of bigger explosions or wider stakes, it's about deeper consequences. The kind that linger after the episode ends. The kind that make you sit with a character's decision rather than just react to it in the moment. And in the context of 2026, that approach feels almost like a response to where the audience is right now. There's a certain fatigue that's been building, not necessarily with the genre itself, but with repetition. The sense that you've seen this version of the story before, even if the details are different. And what this season does, intentionally or not, is tap into that fatigue and redirect it. It says, okay, what if the story doesn't resolve the way you expect? What if the hero doesn't win in a way that resets everything? What if the system doesn't collapse just because you've identified the problem? That kind of storytelling doesn't always play as loudly in marketing, but it resonates in a different way. It sticks. From a release standpoint, the timing also matters. Dropping this season in a landscape where streaming platforms are constantly competing for attention means it has to differentiate itself quickly, not just through brand recognition, but through tone and identity. And that's where the connection to the original Daredevil becomes important, not as nostalgia, but as a foundation. That earlier series carved out a space for this kind of grounded, character-focused storytelling within the superhero genre. It proved there was an audience for something darker, more intimate, more willing to sit in moral ambiguity. And Born Again Season 2 feels like it's picking up that thread, but evolving it for a different moment. Because the industry itself has changed since then. Budgets are bigger, expectations are higher, and there's more pressure to connect everything into a larger universe. And yet, this season feels surprisingly self-contained in its priorities. It acknowledges the broader world, sure, but it doesn't rely on it. It's not setting up the next big crossover. It's not positioning itself as a stepping stone to something else. It's focused on its own story. That kind of focus is rare right now, and it gives the season a sense of identity that stands out. There's also something to be said about how it fits into the broader trajectory of Marvel's television strategy. Over the past few years, there's been a push to bring more cinematic qualities into streaming, higher production values, more interconnected storytelling, a sense that these shows are just as essential as the films. But with that shift has come a certain expectation of scale that doesn't always serve every story. What Born Again Season 2 does is quietly push back against that expectation. It suggests that not every story needs to feel like an event. Sometimes the most impactful narratives are the ones that stay close to the ground, that focus on the people rather than the spectacle. And that choice feels intentional, especially when you consider how the characters themselves are evolving. Because this isn't a season about escalation in the traditional sense. It's about transformation, about what happens after the big moments have already passed, when the consequences start to settle in and reshape everything. From a production perspective, that kind of storytelling requires a different kind of confidence. It means trusting the audience to stay engaged without constant visual stimulation. It means relying on performance, on writing, on atmosphere. And that's where the casting and creative direction really come into play. But even before getting into those specifics, you can feel the foundation being laid here. The pacing, the tone, the way scenes are allowed to breathe. It all points to a creative team that's more interested in building something lasting than something immediately explosive. And in a crowded market, that's a risky move. But it's also the kind of move that can define a project in the long run. Because when you step back and look at how audiences talk about shows over time, it's often not the biggest moments that stick. It's the ones that felt honest, the ones that trusted you to engage with them on a deeper level. And that's the space this season is aiming for. It's not trying to dominate the conversation with sheer scale. It's trying to stay in it by giving people something to think about, something to unpack, something that doesn't resolve neatly the moment the credits roll. And whether or not that approach works for every viewer, it's undeniably deliberate. It reflects an understanding of where the genre has been, where it is now, and where it might need to go next if it wants to keep evolving without losing what made it compelling in the first place. And once you start looking at it through that lens, where the focus is less about spectacle and more about the people carrying the weight of everything that's happening, the cast becomes absolutely central to whether this whole thing works or not. Because a story built on internal conflict lives or dies on performance in a way that louder, more effects-driven projects can sometimes sidestep. At the center of all of it, you've got Charlie Cox. And what's fascinating here is how much of his performance is built on subtraction rather than addition. He's not trying to reinvent Matt Murdock in any obvious way. There's no dramatic shift in personality, no sudden change in tone. Instead, he pulls things inward, makes Matt quieter, more contained, more deliberate. And that restraint does a lot of the heavy lifting, because when you've been playing a character for this long, the temptation is often to escalate, to find new ways to express intensity. But Cox goes the other direction. He lets silence do more work. He allows hesitation to linger. There are moments where you can see a thought forming before he speaks, and sometimes he doesn't even finish that thought out loud. And somehow that feels more revealing than a full monologue would. It's the kind of performance that trusts the audience to pay attention. Then you've got Vincent D'Onofrio, who, at this point, feels almost inseparable from Wilson Fisk. What's impressive isn't just that he's maintained consistency over time, but that he's found ways to evolve the character without breaking what made him compelling in the first place. This version of Fisk isn't louder or more explosive. He's refined. There's a control to him now that makes every small shift in behavior feel significant. A slight change in tone, a pause before responding, even the way he holds eye contact, everything feels intentional. And because he's playing things so tightly, the moments where that control slips, even just a little, carry a lot more weight. What really stands out is how D'Onofrio allows Fisk to genuinely believe in what he's doing. There's no sense that he sees himself as the villain. In his mind, he's solving problems, creating stability. And that conviction makes him harder to dismiss, harder to categorize. It also makes his dynamic with Matt more complex, because you're not just watching a hero oppose a villain. You're watching two people who fundamentally disagree on how the world should function, both convinced they're right. Beyond those two, the supporting cast plays a crucial role in grounding everything. There's a presence from Deborah Ann Woll that brings a kind of emotional clarity to the story whenever she's on screen. Her performance doesn't try to compete with the intensity of what's happening around her. It anchors it. She represents a perspective that's less about strategy and more about human impact. And that balance is essential. She has this way of cutting through the noise of everything else going on, reminding you what's actually at stake on a personal level. Not in a dramatic, speech-heavy way, but in smaller, more intimate moments that feel lived in. And then there's Eldon Henson, who brings a different kind of energy entirely. There's a naturalism to his performance that keeps things from becoming too heavy, too introspective. He doesn't undercut the seriousness of the story, but he adds texture to it. Moments of levity, of frustration, of grounded reality that make the world feel more complete. What's interesting is how the show uses these characters not just as support, but as mirrors. They reflect different aspects of Matt's internal struggle, different ways of engaging with the world he's trying to navigate. And the interactions between them aren't always clean or resolved. There's tension, misunderstanding, even distance at times, but it all feels organic, like a natural consequence of the pressure everyone's under. You also start to notice how the newer additions to the cast are integrated into that dynamic. They're not just there to expand the world, they're there to challenge it, to introduce perspectives that complicate the existing relationships rather than simply reinforcing them. Some of these characters operate within the system Matt is trying to work through. Others exist outside of it entirely. And the way they intersect with his journey adds layers to the narrative that go beyond the central conflict with Fisk. There's a sense that everyone in this world is making choices based on incomplete information, trying to navigate a situation that doesn't offer clear answers. And the cast, collectively, sells that uncertainty in a way that feels authentic. From a chemistry standpoint, the interactions feel less like performances and more like conversations that have history behind them. There's an ease in the way characters talk to each other, even when the subject matter is heavy. Pauses feel natural. Interruptions don't feel scripted. It all contributes to that sense of realism the show is aiming for. And that realism is crucial, because without it, the more abstract elements of the story, the themes about power, control, morality, would risk feeling detached. Instead, they stay grounded in the people experiencing them. Even in scenes where not much is happening on the surface, there's a sense of movement beneath it. Emotional shifts, subtle changes in perspective, moments where a character says one thing but clearly means something else. Those layers are what make the performances stand out. Because in a story that's deliberately avoiding easy answers, the actors have to carry that ambiguity without letting it become confusing or inaccessible. They have to make the audience feel the complexity rather than just understand it intellectually. And for the most part, they do. There's a cohesion to the cast that supports the tone of the show. Nobody feels out of place. Nobody feels like they're operating in a different version of the story. Even when characters disagree, even when they're working toward different goals, they all feel like they belong in the same world. And that consistency allows the narrative to explore its ideas without losing focus. Because at the end of the day, no matter how complex the themes get, it always comes back to the people at the center of it. Their choices, their conflicts, their evolving understanding of what they're actually fighting for. And once you step beyond the performances and start really looking at how all of this is being presented, the direction and visual language of the season quietly reveal just how intentional everything is. Because this isn't a show that's trying to overwhelm you visually, it's trying to pull you in. There's a noticeable restraint in how scenes are framed. A lot of conversations aren't shot in the typical over-the-shoulder, back-and-forth rhythm you'd expect. Instead, the camera tends to linger, sometimes uncomfortably, on a single character for longer than feels natural. And that choice does something subtle but powerful. It forces you to sit with them. You're not just watching Matt Murdock react, you're studying him. The tension builds not from what's happening around him, but from what's happening internally. Lighting plays a huge role here too. The show leans heavily into contrast, not just in a visual sense, but thematically. You'll often see scenes where half a character's face is in shadow, while the other half is lit. And yeah, that's a classic technique. But here, it doesn't feel cliché. It feels earned. It mirrors the duality that the story keeps circling back to. Who are you when no one's watching? And maybe more importantly, who are you when they are? With Wilson Fisk, the visual approach shifts in a really interesting way. His environments are controlled, symmetrical, almost too perfect. Everything is placed exactly where it should be. The lighting is cleaner, more even, less chaotic. But that order starts to feel unsettling after a while, because it's not natural. It's constructed. It reflects the kind of world Fisk is trying to build, one where unpredictability is eliminated, where everything and everyone falls into place according to his design. And the more visually stable his world looks, the more you start to question what's being suppressed underneath it. There are also moments where the show deliberately breaks its own visual rules. Handheld shots come in when things start to slip out of control. The camera becomes less steady, less composed. You feel that shift immediately, even if you can't articulate it. It creates this subconscious sense of instability that lines up perfectly with what the characters are experiencing. And then there's the use of sound, or more specifically, the absence of it. Silence is used as a tool in a way that's surprisingly effective. There are scenes where background noise drops out almost completely, leaving just small, isolated sounds. Breathing, footsteps, fabric moving. It pulls you closer into the moment, makes everything feel more intimate, more immediate. It's especially effective in scenes centered around Matt, because it subtly reinforces how he experiences the world. You're not just watching him, you're, in a way, hearing like him. That kind of immersive design doesn't call attention to itself, but it shapes how you engage with every scene. From a pacing standpoint, the direction continues to resist the urge to rush. Scenes are allowed to stretch, to breathe, to unfold at their own rhythm. And while that might not work for everyone, especially viewers expecting constant momentum, it serves the story that's being told here. Because this isn't about speed, it's about weight. Every moment is given just enough time to land, to settle, to leave an impression before the story moves forward. And that accumulation of small, deliberate moments builds into something that feels much more substantial than a series of fast-moving plot points. What's also worth noticing is how action is handled. When it happens, it's not overly stylized or exaggerated. It feels grounded, sometimes even messy. Fights aren't about looking cool. They're about impact, about consequence. You feel the effort behind every movement, the strain, the exhaustion. And that approach keeps the action aligned with the tone of the story. It never feels like a break from the narrative. It feels like an extension of it. There's a sequence, without getting into specifics, that plays out almost entirely in a confined space. And instead of relying on flashy choreography, it focuses on proximity. How close the characters are to each other, how little room they have to move, how every decision becomes more urgent because there's nowhere to escape. That kind of staging turns physical conflict into something more psychological. And that's really what defines the direction overall. It's not trying to impress you, it's trying to involve you, to make you feel like you're part of the tension, part of the uncertainty, part of the slow unraveling of everything these characters thought they understood about their world. Even the transitions between scenes are handled with care. There's often a visual or thematic link between one moment and the next, a line of dialogue that echoes, a similar composition, a repeated visual motif. It creates a sense of continuity that ties everything together without making it feel forced. And all of this adds up to a viewing experience that's less about passive consumption and more about active engagement. You're not just watching the story unfold, you're interpreting it. You're filling in gaps, reading between lines, noticing details that might not seem important at first, but gain meaning over time. And that kind of storytelling doesn't just stay with you because of what happens. It stays with you because of how it made you feel while it was happening. And when you consider how all of these elements, performance, direction, cinematography, sound design, pacing, interact, you start to see that Born Again Season 2 isn't just continuing a story. It's refining a philosophy of storytelling that feels increasingly rare in superhero television. It's a show that trusts the audience to keep up, to pay attention to subtle cues, to feel the tension in silences and shadows, rather than relying solely on explosions or plot twists. And that trust in the audience changes the stakes dramatically. Because instead of telling viewers what to think or feel, the show puts them in a position to discover it themselves. Every decision, every hesitation, every unspoken glance becomes a prompt for interpretation. You start to understand the city, the system, and the moral universe these characters inhabit as if you're piecing it together alongside them. The city itself becomes a character, almost a silent partner in the narrative. The streets of Hell's Kitchen aren't just backdrops. They're weighted with history, memory, and consequence. The way certain locations are lit, framed, and revisited gives the impression that the neighborhood remembers, not just the characters' actions, but their failures, their successes, the impact of their choices over time. The alleys, the rooftops, the offices, they all carry the imprint of past conflicts. And that lingering sense of history adds depth to every confrontation, every conversation, every quiet moment of reflection. One of the most remarkable aspects of this season is how it allows moral ambiguity to unfold naturally, without resorting to contrived plot devices. Matt Murdock inhabits is complex, and because his previous choices have consequences that ripple outward. Similarly, Wilson Fisk is compelling, not because he's suddenly humanized in a neat way, but because the show has consistently given him agency and rationale, and now we see the natural evolution of that logic. This is a show that rewards observation. The little details in the mise-en-scène, the placement of objects, the use of light and shadow, the subtle interactions between characters, carry meaning. And while you might not grasp everything on a first viewing, repeated exposure reveals layers of storytelling craftsmanship that go far beyond what most superhero adaptations attempt. Music and score, too, play a critical role. The themes are not overtly heroic or bombastic. They are nuanced, sometimes unsettling, sometimes sparse. They enhance the mood without dictating emotional response. When tension builds, it's often underscored by subtle drones, minor keys, or a minimalist percussive motif, rather than sweeping orchestral flourishes. It's a subtle but effective strategy. Instead of telling you, "This is exciting," the score draws you in, making you complicit in the suspense, allowing anxiety and anticipation to build naturally. There's also a maturity to how the series handles interpersonal conflict. Arguments aren't staged for maximum dramatic effect. They often feel raw, naturalistic, and even uncomfortable. Characters interrupt each other, talk over one another, or remain silent in frustration. It mirrors real-life interactions, lending credibility to the dialogue and making the stakes of every confrontation feel higher. And then there's the subtle social commentary. Hell's Kitchen is depicted not just as a playground for vigilantes and mob bosses, but as a living, breathing community grappling with systemic challenges: inequality, corruption, urban decay. The show doesn't hit viewers over the head with political messages, but by embedding these realities into everyday scenes, the way cops patrol the streets, the casual conversations among neighbors, the struggles of small business owners, it situates the story in a world that feels lived in and consequential. Cinematically, this season takes advantage of perspective in fascinating ways. POV shots are used sparingly but intentionally, often giving you a sense of disorientation or vulnerability during key moments. Depth of field is carefully manipulated to highlight what's important while keeping the background alive with hints of other narrative threads. Even simple tracking shots through a corridor or street can carry tension because you're aware of what might be lurking just out of focus. The choreography of action scenes continues to impress, but with a refined purpose. Every fight serves character and story rather than spectacle alone. You feel the weight behind punches, the strain of movement, the precision required in combat. It's more visceral, more grounded, and significantly more meaningful because it reflects each character's skill, strategy, and psychological state at that point in the narrative. And humor is deployed thoughtfully. It's not constant, nor does it undercut tension, but when it appears, it offers relief that feels earned and character-driven rather than inserted for broad appeal. A quick quip, a moment of human levity. These moments deepen connection to the characters, making the stakes of darker sequences hit harder by contrast. By the mid-season point, the narrative structure itself starts to feel like a reflection of the themes at play. There's a careful balance between immediacy and long-term consequence. Episodes often begin by confronting past decisions and end with the implications of new ones. Nothing feels wasteful, and there's an almost literary rhythm: setup, reflection, escalation, consequence, pause. Each episode feels like a chapter in a larger, evolving meditation on morality, justice, and personal responsibility. And what's brilliant is that it never feels preachy. The show poses questions without offering easy answers, forcing the audience to sit with discomfort. Every choice, every moral compromise, every quiet victory or defeat echoes beyond the episode it occurs in. The effect is cumulative. By the time you reach the later episodes, you feel the weight of the season not in its spectacle, but in its emotional and psychological resonance. Even the editing supports this approach. There are no abrupt jump cuts or frenetic sequences meant purely to shock. Instead, the rhythm is deliberate, allowing tension to swell naturally. Transitions between scenes are often subtle visual or thematic echoes, an object, a line of dialogue, a mirrored composition, that tie story beats together in a way that rewards attentive viewing. All of this builds toward an ending that, again, resists conventional closure. You aren't left with a tidy resolution, but you are left with clarity regarding character arcs and moral evolution. The story respects the intelligence of its audience, expecting them to grapple with uncertainty and ambiguity. And in doing so, it elevates itself above the noise of more formulaic superhero fare. By the time the credits roll, what lingers isn't the adrenaline of the fight scenes or the shock of a twist. It's the moral tension, the internal landscapes of the characters, and the lingering questions about choices and consequences. That's a remarkable achievement for a show operating in a genre often defined by spectacle over substance. In the end, Born Again Season 2 doesn't just continue the story of Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk. It deepens it, challenges it, and invites the audience to grow alongside it. It's rare to find a superhero narrative that treats its viewers as active participants rather than passive consumers. And that commitment to depth, nuance, and emotional honesty is exactly what sets this season apart. It's a meditation on power, on restraint, on morality, and on what it really means to fight for justice in a world where victory is never absolute and compromise is unavoidable. And as the season's arc begins to settle, you realize that the story isn't just about heroes and villains. It's about the choices we make in spaces where right and wrong aren't neatly separated, and where the consequences of every decision echo far beyond the moment we make them. And looking at how the narrative threads intertwine, it becomes clear that the show isn't just interested in surface-level conflicts. It's interested in the long game, in the ways lives ripple outward from one another. A single decision by Matt or Fisk isn't just an isolated event. It impacts colleagues, allies, civilians, and even the criminal underworld in ways that feel organic rather than forced. The storytelling gives you the sense that this world continues even when you're not looking, that Hell's Kitchen exists outside the frame, and that each character's choices carry tangible, lasting weight. One of the subtle achievements of this season is how it plays with expectation without feeling gimmicky. There are moments where you anticipate a confrontation, a reveal, or a twist, and the show either subverts that expectation or delivers it in a way that makes you reconsider the context entirely. It's clever without being self-congratulatory, a balancing act that so many shows of this genre fail to pull off. And that's part of why the tension throughout the season feels so effective. You're constantly aware that any misstep, any miscalculation, can change the trajectory of the story. The threat of consequence isn't only physical, it's ethical, emotional, and social. Watching Matt navigate these overlapping layers of challenge, balancing his personal code with the realities of his environment, gives the audience a sense of intimacy and immediacy that's rare in superhero narratives. The narrative also plays beautifully with parallels and contrasts. Fisk and Matt, for instance, are often positioned as mirrors of one another. Their moral compasses differ, but their strategic thinking, their endurance, and their capacity for patience show striking similarities. The visual framing reinforces this. Similar compositions, matching camera angles, and symmetrical positioning in key sequences subtly signal their duality. These details aren't overt. They're the kind of things you notice subconsciously, but they amplify the thematic resonance without a single line of exposition. Secondary characters are treated with comparable care. Each supporting character isn't just filling a slot. They're given agency, personal motivations, and arcs that feel lived in. Relationships are layered, sometimes contradictory, and often evolve in unpredictable but believable ways. Friendships are tested, alliances are fragile, and loyalties are complicated. The show's willingness to allow relationships to develop over time, rather than resolving them neatly in a single episode, contributes to the realism and the emotional impact. And it's not just about dialogue or plot mechanics. The show leverages micro-moments brilliantly. A lingering glance, a tightened jaw, or a subtle shift in posture can communicate volumes about a character's internal state. These moments are often more telling than any exposition-heavy scene, and the actor's ability to inhabit these nuances elevates the storytelling. It's a reminder that this season is as much about internal struggle as it is about external conflict. When action does arrive, it carries emotional and narrative weight precisely because the quieter, character-driven moments set the stakes so effectively. You feel the danger, the urgency, and the personal stakes because you understand who's involved, what they care about, and what they stand to lose. Action sequences are not just about spectacle. They're the culmination of everything you've learned about the character's abilities, limitations, and moral choices. The pacing, too, is meticulously calibrated. Episodes often ebb and flow between high-intensity moments and slower, reflective scenes. This rhythm prevents fatigue and allows viewers to process character decisions and plot developments fully. The slower, quieter scenes are just as essential as the climactic sequences because they provide context, emotional grounding, and breathing room for reflection. Visually, the show continues to employ shadow, light, and composition in ways that reinforce its narrative themes. Dark alleys, rain-slicked streets, and shadow-filled interiors evoke the noir roots of the story, while keeping the tone grounded and atmospheric. Cinematography doesn't rely on grandiosity, but instead on subtle, intentional choices that make every frame meaningful. The visuals serve the story rather than overshadow it, which is crucial for maintaining the season's immersive realism. The sound design complements the visuals beautifully. Environmental audio cues, the subtle hum of city life, and carefully placed silence all work in concert with the score to draw viewers into the world. Moments of quiet amplify tension and force attention to character expression, while sudden, well-timed sound effects punctuate key action beats or emotional realizations. It's a symphony of subtle auditory cues that reinforce rather than distract. Thematically, the season continues to explore the tension between justice and vengeance, law and morality, personal ethics and societal expectations. Matt's journey is as much internal as external. Every decision carries ethical weight, and the series refuses to present moral absolutes. Choices are complicated, consequences are messy, and victories are rarely complete or uncomplicated. This complexity sets the series apart from more formulaic superhero fare and encourages deep audience engagement. Even the writing supports this layered approach. Dialogue is naturalistic, reflecting how people speak when under stress or moral pressure. Lines are sometimes incomplete, overlapping, or intentionally ambiguous, reflecting the real-world complexity of communication and decision-making. There's intelligence in the pacing of conversations, in what's left unsaid, and in how tension is built through subtle character interaction rather than exposition. And that extends to the handling of suspense. The show doesn't rely on jump scares or gratuitous cliffhangers. Instead, it builds suspense through anticipation, through the knowledge that every action carries consequences, and that characters are navigating morally gray terrain with no clear roadmap. The uncertainty of outcome, paired with intimate character focus, makes suspense feel earned and grounded. By threading these elements together, performance, cinematography, sound, writing, and thematic depth, the season achieves a rare synthesis. Each component supports the others, creating a cohesive, immersive experience that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's storytelling that rewards careful attention, repeated viewings, and emotional investment. Ultimately, what distinguishes Born Again Season 2 is how it treats its characters and audience with respect. It doesn't talk down, it doesn't oversimplify, and it doesn't rely solely on spectacle. It invites viewers into a morally complex, emotionally rich world, and trusts them to engage with it thoughtfully. That trust, paired with meticulous craftsmanship in every aspect of production, is what elevates the season from just another superhero story to a compelling, resonant exploration of heroism, choice, and consequence. And as the narrative arcs unfold, it's increasingly clear that this is a show not just about battles between heroes and villains, but about the consequences of choices, the weight of responsibility, and the subtle, often invisible forces that shape our decisions and define who we are in the face of conflict. The season's power lies in that attention to nuance, in the space it allows for thought, reflection, and emotional resonance. It's a meditation on struggle, morality, and identity, wrapped in the framework of a superhero narrative, but deeply human at its core. It's that blend of grounded realism, emotional depth, and narrative sophistication that makes Born Again Season 2 not just engaging, but genuinely compelling. An example of what superhero storytelling can achieve when it's approached with care, intelligence, and respect for both characters and audience. And when you step back and take a broader view, what becomes striking is how much Born Again Season 2 trusts the audience's intelligence. Unlike many superhero shows that feel like they're constantly explaining themselves, this season leaves room for viewers to connect the dots. The show doesn't need to spell out every motive or consequence. It allows you to inhabit the same space as the characters, to feel the tension and uncertainty in real time. That trust is rare, and it elevates the narrative from mere entertainment to something more immersive, more thoughtful. One of the most compelling aspects is how the season balances hope and despair. There's a darkness to the world, undeniably. The challenges Matt faces are real, the threats are formidable, and the moral compromises are unavoidable. But amidst that darkness, there's a thread of resilience. The show doesn't rely on cheap optimism. Instead, hope emerges organically from perseverance, from strategic thinking, and from the quiet moments where characters choose integrity over convenience. Those moments feel earned because they're hard-won, not handed down by a deus ex machina. Visually, the production continues to impress with its intentionality. Camera angles often emphasize confinement and tension, whether through tight framing, low ceilings, or urban claustrophobia that mirrors Matt's struggle to navigate a city filled with corruption and hidden dangers. Conversely, when the narrative calls for openness, symbolic release, or moral clarity, the framing widens, the camera pulls back, giving you room to breathe and reflect. It's subtle, but it reinforces the psychological and thematic dimensions of the story in ways that dialogue alone cannot. The interplay between light and shadow remains a hallmark of the season's aesthetic. Cinematographers lean into chiaroscuro, not for stylistic flair, but to reflect inner conflict. Characters often occupy the border between illumination and darkness, and this visual metaphor underscores the ethical ambiguity that defines their choices. These lighting decisions also create an immersive, almost tactile quality to each scene. The textures of walls, rain-slicked streets, and dim interiors feel tangible, like you could reach out and touch them. Another standout element is the meticulous attention to continuity and payoff. Threads introduced in early episodes often reverberate much later, creating a sense of cohesion and long-term consequence. The writers don't introduce subplots arbitrarily. They seed them carefully, layering narrative and thematic resonance so that every interaction and event has significance beyond its immediate context. That kind of long-form storytelling encourages active engagement and rewards close attention. Sound design continues to serve the story in understated but powerful ways. Silence is treated as a character in its own right. Moments of quiet punctuate dramatic beats, forcing attention onto subtle performances or the tension in an environment. Small sounds, a creaking floorboard, a distant siren, the rustle of fabric, become narrative signals, conveying urgency or forewarning without overt exposition. And when music is used, it's rarely overtly heroic. Instead, motifs emphasize mood, tension, or internal states, enhancing the psychological immersion rather than distracting from it. The editing choices are similarly intentional. Rather than rapid-fire cuts designed to shock or dazzle, sequences are allowed to breathe, giving the audience time to absorb stakes and internalize character reactions. Transitional shots are often linked thematically, visually, or emotionally, creating subtle echoes that reward viewers who pay attention to details. The rhythm of the show is deliberate, crafting an experience that feels cohesive and immersive, rather than fragmented or formulaic. Dialogues throughout the season remain sharp, realistic, and emotionally resonant. Characters rarely speak in exposition-heavy monologues. Instead, conversations unfold organically, with interruptions, pauses, and contradictions that mirror real-life communication. The tension in speech patterns, the unsaid subtext, and the micro-reactions, small glances, fleeting expressions, involuntary gestures, create a rich tapestry of emotional and psychological depth. Watching these exchanges, you feel that you're not merely an observer, but an active participant in understanding character motivations. Humor is deployed strategically and sparingly. It never undercuts tension, but serves as a brief, humanizing respite in otherwise high-stakes situations. These moments are character-driven, arising naturally from established personality traits or interpersonal dynamics, and they make subsequent darker moments hit harder because they highlight the stakes emotionally rather than just narratively. The show's thematic exploration of duality continues to shine. Matt and Fisk remain central mirrors to one another. Their paths are intertwined, their methods often diametrically opposed. Yet there's an underlying symmetry in intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking. The tension between their moral frameworks, Matt's ethics versus Fisk's pragmatism, is explored not just in dialogue or confrontation, but visually and narratively. Mirrored compositions, similar framing, and thematic echoes in subplots emphasize the duality in ways that feel organic rather than contrived. Supporting characters are treated with comparable care. Allies, adversaries, and peripheral figures each have distinct motivations and arcs, often reflecting or contrasting with the main characters. Relationships develop in nuanced ways, avoiding simplification or stereotyping. Trust, loyalty, and betrayal are explored realistically, reinforcing the season's broader meditation on human complexity. The action choreography continues to impress, but is grounded in realism. Every punch, every maneuver carries narrative and emotional weight. Combat is a language of its own, reflecting character skill, physical and psychological states, and situational stakes. Fight sequences aren't set pieces designed solely to thrill. They're extensions of character, consequence, and story. You feel the effort and risk behind every movement, and that authenticity enhances the tension and immersion. Perhaps most importantly, Born Again Season 2 maintains its commitment to moral complexity. Victory is rarely absolute, and consequences linger. Choices are nuanced, and the outcomes are often messy, reflecting the reality that heroism exists in a gray space. The narrative rewards reflection and challenges viewers to consider the ethical implications of actions, rather than simply presenting a binary good versus evil framework. By the season's midpoint, the cumulative effect of these elements becomes apparent. You've been immersed in a world that feels coherent, lived in, and morally intricate. Every moment, visual, auditory, narrative, or emotional, contributes to a unified experience. The show encourages thought, empathy, and engagement, making the viewing experience feel participatory rather than passive. In short, Born Again Season 2 exemplifies the potential of superhero storytelling to move beyond spectacle and engage audiences with intelligence, emotional depth, and narrative sophistication. It's a series that rewards careful attention, reflective thinking, and emotional investment, setting a high bar for the genre and demonstrating the unique power of long-form, character-driven narratives within the superhero framework. It's a meditation on choice, consequence, morality, and identity, framed within the tension and danger of a vigilante world. And it leaves a lasting impression precisely because it respects both the intelligence of its audience and the complexity of its characters. The more you dwell on it, the more you realize that every visual choice, every performance nuance, every line of dialogue, and every piece of sound design is carefully orchestrated to build a cohesive, immersive experience. And that careful orchestration, that respect for audience engagement, is what ultimately makes Born Again Season 2 feel like not just a continuation of a story, but a masterclass in intelligent, humanized superhero storytelling. The season doesn't simply entertain, it challenges, provokes thought, and resonates emotionally, leaving viewers with questions, reflections, and an enduring sense of connection to the world and its characters long after the final scene fades to black. The genius of this season is that it takes familiar characters and a familiar setting and elevates them through restraint, depth, and nuance. It reminds viewers that superhero narratives don't need to rely on spectacle alone to captivate. They can explore complexity, human vulnerability, and moral ambiguity, delivering a profound and lasting impact that lingers well beyond the credits. And perhaps most importantly, it sets a new standard for what can be achieved when a series treats its audience with respect, allowing them to inhabit the story, wrestle with its moral dilemmas, and experience the emotional stakes in a way that feels both real and deeply satisfying. The brilliance of Born Again Season 2 lies in that synthesis, the careful alignment of narrative, visual, auditory, and performance elements into a cohesive, immersive, morally complex, and emotionally resonant whole that doesn't just tell a story, it makes you live it. It's a rare achievement in any genre, and especially within the crowded landscape of superhero media, where depth and subtlety are often sacrificed for spectacle. Here, every choice feels deliberate, every consequence feels real, and every moment resonates in ways that stay with the audience, encouraging reflection, discussion, and repeated engagement long after the final scene.